shade-grown coffee is for the birds, and more. Some of us on this call have had the privilege and the pleasure of visiting coffee fincas in Central or South America, and Roberta is on the call. Sunny and I were with Roberta and Gary at one of them in Panama, both to enjoy the coffee grown there and to see the birds that live there year-round or spend the winter on their wintering grounds there. Dean Cycon, who's the founder of Dean's Beans Organic Coffee Company, and he's joining us from Massachusetts, thanks to Zoom, has spent more than 25 years not just traveling to scores of coffee farms around the world, but also working to support the indigenous communities that rely on coffee farming as their source of income. Dean started his career as an environmental and indigenous rights lawyer. His interest in activism led him to a fellowship at Woodhull Oceanographic Institution in 1985 to examine the impacts of development on indigenous communities. And through that work, he met a coffee shop owner who wanted to create an organization to help coffee farmers. One thing led to another, and he founded Dean's Beans in 1993 with the goal of using specialty coffee to help drive positive social, economic, and ecological change through strict fair trade principles, profit sharing, and development assistance. In the process, Dean became a Javatrekker, which is the name of his fascinating book subtitled Dispatches from the World of Fair Trade Coffee. Tonight, Dean's going to talk about the importance of organic and shade-grown coffee, both for humans and birds, and I have a feeling that none of us will ever look at a bag of coffee the same way again. So thanks so much for accepting the invitation to speak to us, Dean.
It's a pleasure, Rena. Thanks so much for having me. And I'll try to get you out in time to get over to the other birds in town, right? So actually, I'm going to take you on a very interesting voyage tonight. We're going to talk about shade-grown coffee. We're going to talk about organics. We're going to talk about Smithsonian, which I've been involved with since day one of the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center. We're the first funders of that center back in '93, I think. And I'm going to take you on some excursions that you probably weren't aware of. So I'm going to talk a lot about birds, but I'm also going to talk about ecology, economics, trade, and anything that comes into my mind within the next hour. I think we're on for about an hour, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, good. I don't want to keep
and reminding people, if you have questions, you'll find the chat box that you can enter your questions in, and then at the end, Rena will select those and read them, and Dean can respond. Or Dean can respond.
Yeah.
Share the screen.
So I started a coffee company in 1993. I co-founded the first nonprofit development organization in the coffee world in 1988 called Coffee Kids. And through that took me around the world creating development projects in indigenous coffee communities. And then in '93, I said, you know what? I'm tired of telling these companies how they should behave and then just getting little contributions, but they don't change their basic business practices, which are keeping people in poverty, keeping the environment heading down. And so I thought I'll try to model something instead. So I'm pretty much the first social entrepreneur in the coffee world, certainly the first environmental and indigenous rights lawyer in coffee. And it was kind of a lonely voyage in the beginning because, frankly, coffee industry was not a very nice place. And the response to our request for funds to do development work or environmental work was usually met with, why do we want to do that? We already pay them for the coffee. So that thought process has evolved dramatically, and coffee is probably one of the more progressive sectors in the economic world today, but still has a long way to go, and we'll be getting into all that. So let me move right into some slides. What are we going to do? We're going to share.
Yeah, you should be ready to share.
Point. No problem. There we are. And share that. Here we go. Look at that. Worked fine. Okay, so I'm calling this "Put Your Money Where Your Beak Is," because I think we buy coffee and we buy a lot of things blindly without really knowing what's going on behind it. And one of the purposes of fair trade and direct trade, other things like that, is to help break through those many layers of middlemen along the supply chain, so that we're dealing with coffee farmers and their families and their environments as human beings, not as fungible parts of commodities. So it's a very different way of looking. And frankly, in the past, it hasn't been in the interest of coffee companies to let you know that farmers are human beings. It's better to give you an image of Juan Valdez, a happy guy in a white jacket and a happy donkey. So you don't think about the environment. You don't think about the destruction of critical migratory bird habitat. You don't think about the pesticide use, but that's what it's about. So I've worked for 28 years now as a coffee guy, trying to change that. And some of that will come up. But this talk isn't about me, and it's not about Dean's Beans. I'm not trying to sell you coffee, okay? My wife, I was telling her what I was going to talk about today, and she goes, well, aren't you going to describe the coffee? Aren't you going to say the difference between this coffee and that coffee? And I said, you know, actually, no, I never thought of that, because I'm not here to try to sell you coffee. It's about the environment. It's about migratory birds in coffee environments. Okay, let's rock and roll. Hello, why aren't we moving here?
Yeah, put your cursor on.
Okay, got it. All right, so coffee is grown in over 80 countries around the world, between the Tropic of Cancer, 30, 40 degrees north of the equator, Tropic of Capricorn, 30 to 40 degrees south of the equator. In that band, that tropical band, are all the countries where coffee is grown. Caveat, because of climate change, coffee is now being grown in Southern California for the first time in history, because the environment has changed. Okay, but that's a little side swipe. All coffee is really, commercial coffee is grown around the equator. And that says a lot of things, because where's most of the conflict in the world? It's in the countries around the equator. Where's the greatest impact of climate change? It's in the countries around the equator. Where's the biggest incidence of poverty? In the countries around the equator. So coffee, a cup of coffee represents every major aspect and issue in globalization, women's rights, indigenous rights, the environment, economics. All of that is represented inside a cup of coffee. And it's really important to look inside that cup and see what's going on, so that when you buy what you buy, you can buy knowledgeably and say, wow, those are the values I want to support, or I'm not going anywhere near that in my name with my money. So let's get into the world of coffee. Specifically, we're going to talk about shade-grown coffee. There are two types of coffee farms in the world. There's large-scale monoculture, usually called plantations or estates, and then there are small holdings. The majority of the world's coffee is grown on plots that are about 2 acres. So around the world, generally, the size of a small coffee farm, which is about 70% of all coffee farms, 2 acres. Very, very small, okay? Those small lots tend to be heavily forested, not because the farmers have degrees in ecology from Cornell, but rather because they know that's how you're supposed to grow coffee, because coffee needs shade. If coffee doesn't have shade to take away the heat of the day, it burns. What does it need then? It needs chemicals. And so monoculture plantations, large-scale estates and plantations, even though those are swank-sounding names, are often places where there are most heavily pesticides. We're going to talk about pesticides a little later on. We're talking about shade-grown coffee. So shade-grown coffee, as you can see, uses a variety, a multi-storied approach. Usually bananas and fruit trees are intergrown with the coffee to provide shade and also to provide food for the table and income for the farmers, alternative income for the farmers. But a host of trees, 90 different species of trees that I know about in different countries. Different countries have different trees. It's really important in shade-grown coffee that the trees are native, because during the 70s, 80s, and even 90s, development was about technology. So it was about, well, let's get some eucalyptus trees in there because they're fast growing, not thinking from an ecological point of view that eucalyptus and leucaia and other trees are not appropriate for certain environments, and therefore the insects that go in those bark are different than the insects that are usually there, so the birds don't have what they usually want to eat and they go away. 95% of migratory birds disappear from monoculture plantations, okay? For a number of reasons. One of them is pesticides. One of them is the changed environment that changes their food supply. So again, let's carry on. Shade-grown coffee. I want to take you for a quick walk. By the way, I've taken all these photographs except the ones I'm in and the ones of the birds. I took a couple of the birds, but most of them are from Cornell. So let's take a walk through a forest. This is in Peru. This is a shade-grown coffee farm. And this is actually one of the first certified Smithsonian farms that we worked with the farmers to get their certification. I'll talk about that. So check this out. Look at all the different trees, the different heights. There's coffee, the low plant, dark plant in the background. You're about to see, that's coffee. See, the red berries and yellow berries. Yellow is a different kind of coffee. You're also about to see some cacao, because cacao is another plant that's grown. Here you go. There's cacao pods. They're grown for shade, okay, because they're broadleaf. They provide shade. And again, they provide, there they are. There's the cacao pods. They provide alternative income for the farmers. They're also very resistant to climate change. So it's helpful to have them, okay? So that was a very quick tour of a shade-grown coffee farm in a good one. Now, interesting, I got to share with you that when I walked on that farm, because we've funded, since 2004, we've been funding reforestation programs around the world, and our biggest one is in Peru. So I'm walking through this forest with the old guy that owns it, and in another, I don't have the film with me, but in another place, the trees are, you know, as big around as your mother-in-law, you know, the trees are as tall, oh, they're just huge. And we're walking through this forest, and I said, Don Jaco, how many of these trees did you plant? And he said, all of them. It's so interesting because remember, this is the tropics. Trees grow 24/7, right? All year long. There's no downtime in the winter. So the plantings that we've done have, starting in 2004, have resulted in full-grown forests by now. And to get to the end of the story with that, we've planted over 350,000 trees in Peru, and their survival rate is about 80%, which is extraordinary in the world of reforestation. So a good success story with a lot of good potential for the migratory species in Peru. Okay, let me tell you, there are a lot of migratory birds going from my neck of the woods here in New England and your neck of the woods in the Chicago area, Midwest, to coffee lands. And so here are a number of them, and I'm just going to go through some of them briefly to show where they are, you know, where they are from you and me, where they go. And therefore, if you're interested in a particular kind of bird, you can actually buy the coffee from the farms that support that bird habitat, which is a very interesting approach. So let's get into it. Let's talk about some birds. Baltimore Oriole. Okay, you can see the migratory pattern. Baltimore Oriole is like most of the migratory birds we're going to talk about, has a wide pattern from all over the northern tier of the United States out as far as kind of Iowa or Montana, and then boom, down into the southern part of Mexico, all of Central America, and parts of Colombia and Venezuela. And but for our purposes, our coffee farms in Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Colombia are the home to the Baltimore Oriole. One of the interesting things about the Baltimore Oriole is they make these long hanging nests, which look like tube socks throughout Latin America, a very cool nest. One thing I want to point out with all these different species is their habitat needs are very, very different in each country. And so it's not just I'm showing you these cool pictures of birds, which you already know these birds, but how important the varied ecosystem in the different countries in Latin America, South and Central America, are for different kinds of birds. So it's really important to have really mixed story, interspecies forests to protect the widest range of migratory bird habitats. Grosbeaks, I love them. All these birds I see in my backyard and in my forested area here. Grosbeaks generally hang out in second growth woodlands and open areas. Okay, whereas the Oreos tend to hang out in open fields. So they have different needs for their food gathering, and obviously the farm has to reflect that if it's going to have visitors, grosbeak visitors. Also, grosbeaks eat fruit and seeds primarily in Latin America, whereas some of the other species are insect feeders. Once again, it matters a lot what species of trees and what species of bush are in the farmlands if they're going to keep those migratory birds there. Barn swallows, super common, right? All over the United States, all over a majority of mainland Canada, and they migrate throughout all of Latin, Central and South America. They have the widest range of any of the migratory birds we're going to be talking about. They're also very, very aggressive. And just in case, I'm sure you guys know this, but it was swallows, the destruction of swallows in the 1800s that sort of inadvertently or indirectly led to the founding of the first Audubon Society. I'll leave that with you to figure out the details, but that's what I've read. Scarlet tanagers, one of my favorites. I love them. They're interesting that they're high canopy nesters. So as opposed to some of the other birds we've been talking about that are ground nesters or margin nesters, these guys are way up in the high canopy. So once again, you need that multi-stories, all right? Primarily, we see tanagers in my backyard, and then we see them again in Colombia and Peru, where we work with farmers. Next up, ovenbird. The ovenbird is interesting because it nests on the ground and creates a nest that looks like a Dutch oven, therefore the name. They nest on the ground. They eat insects and seeds on the ground. They rarely leave the forest floor habitat. So it's very important for them to have that kind of habitat where leaves are dropping, mulch is being created, insects have habitat. And when we talk about deforestation later and reforestation with non-native species, we'll talk about how those habitats get disrupted and therefore the birds can't eat, they're not comfortable, they don't hang out there. And so that's one of the reasons, as I said before, that 95% of migratory birds are missing from monoculture and large denuded plantations. A little vireo, the red-eyed vireo. They prefer broadleaf forests. So once again, you need trees that match that, and they build their nests in the forks of branches, sort of midway up the canopy. The vireo is also from, you can find them in Colombia and Peru. So if you're interested in supporting that species, you have that option. Colombia, Peru, also Brazil. We don't carry Brazilian coffee at the moment, but I've done a lot of work in Mato Grosso in the center of Brazil and Minas Gerais. All right, next up, wood thrush. The cool thing about the wood thrush, if you're not familiar with them, is that they have a multi-boxed throat so that they can actually sing two notes at once and harmonize with themselves. It's the only bird that does that, and it's just a very cool function, especially if you need them in your choir. One of the problems, they live in the open understory of forests. So below the canopy, they dine on insects and berries. One of the interesting things about the thrush habitat up here is that acid rain in the Northeast, right out through the Great Lakes, has destroyed some of the insects that they eat to then turn into calcium in their bodies to strengthen their eggs. So like Silent Spring, the birds' eggs shells have thinned out and the populations have thinned out because the survival rate of thrush eggs is much less because of that. Okay, I'll just mention, gosh, there's so many more, but I'm just going to go through quickly so you can see some of the places they go and some of the birds we see. I don't want to spend all night on the birds themselves. Ruby-throated hummingbirds are so cool. They can fly backwards, they can fly upside down. We see them throughout Central America. Warblers, a variety of warblers. Black and white warblers are really cool looking. Again, throughout Mexico and Latin America, Central America. I think, can I make a note on something special I wanted to talk about with them? Yep, they also build their nests on the ground and also in rotted stumps. So those stumps have to be left there, not clear cut out for the habitat to survive. Yellow-bellied sapsuckers and the rest of the woodpecker types that we see banging away are very big in Mexico and Central America, and they actually do survive on sap more than anything else. But what's interesting is when they make their holes and when they leave, those holes then become habitats for insects and other life forms that then encourage other birds to come in. So there's sapsuckers and woodpeckers are what we would call anchor species or backbone species that allow others to survive as well. Great crested flycatchers, a lot of them in Colombia. Broad-winged hawks, one of the little baby raptors that we see, as you can see all over northern part of South America, from Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia. Okay, so that's a range of the birds that we see on well-tended, small-scale farms, the kind that we work with, the kind that produce the majority of the world's coffee. So what are the inhibitions to healthy migratory bird habitat in coffee lands? Well, it's a whole host of things, but some things we can do something about and some things we don't know much about and therefore can't have much of an impact on. One of them is strictly the economics of coffee. So coffee prices are determined not by the farmer and the buyer in a typical Adam Smithian sense of a willing buyer and a willing seller getting together an arm's length transaction. The price of coffee is determined in New York and London on the Board of Trade. And the Board of Trade is a trading ring, as you can see, where 99% men, young men in colored tunics, shout up and down the price of coffee just like a stock market. It has nothing to do with the farmer's cost of production or the need for a reasonable profit to reinvest in the farm and the environment and the family. And so one of the biggest problems with coffee is that coffee farmers cannot rely on a reasonable price year after year so that they can tend to their families and tend to the environment. So when we in the North ask farmers in the South, hey, can you take care of the environment better? It's really, really hard for them to hear that because they've got survival on their mind. And that issue of survival is going to come up throughout this conversation. Even though we're talking about migratory birds and habitat, it's all about coffee farmers and survival. So right now, and for the last year and a half, the price of coffee paid to farmers is below or at the cost of production, which means that every time you buy a pound of coffee, you're pretty much pushing a farmer deeper and deeper into poverty. because they're making less on selling it than it takes them to grow it. So that's a problem, because this coffee market, as determined by the Board of Trade, goes up and down and up and down and up and down on a daily basis, not because of the supply of coffee or because of the reasonable economic needs of the farmer, but because coffee has become a speculative commodity in the last 10 years. And as a result, coffee prices go up and down with speculation as to future crops, as to whether there's going to be a war peace deal in Colombia, which means more coffee would come on the market, which means the price in the future will drop, sell futures, that sort of thing. So it's a shame, but coffee as a commodity really can't reflect the values that you want to see, because its basic underlying economics is not about that. All right. One of the biggest inhibitions to keeping healthy migratory bird habitat, obviously, is deforestation. But there are different types of deforestation in different parts of the world, and that's important to understand too. The drivers of deforestation are very, very different. In some countries, like Brazil, it's mining. Huge, as far as the eye can see, mines in northern Brazil, looking for primarily coal and gold. All right, same thing in Colombia now. Colombia is starting to experience a lot of mining, which is destroying important tropical forests and also destroying coffee farms. In Asia, the biggest cause of deforestation right now is that picture you see of the creation of palm oil plantations. Palm oil is so incredibly destructive. I took this photo flying over a former primary beautiful forest that has been totally wiped out and now replanted with palm oil trees. Palm oil trees look like orcs in The Lord of the Rings. They're short, squat, ugly things that march up the mountainside in formation. So they're all in rows. They have heavy overlapping palm fronds. Nothing lives underneath them. So the bark doesn't support the kind of insects that birds need. The soil doesn't provide place for passing animals. So later I'll talk about it, but we work to reinstate endangered orangutan, tigers, elephants, and rhinos in Sumatra because they're disappearing because the forest is being wiped out in northern Sumatra where we work. So that's the biggest driver of deforestation there. There's also a claim, a lot of people think, like in Brazil, that in Argentina, that forests are being cleared for hamburger production to export to the north. On the surface, that's true, but what's really driving that, and this is why it's hard to control, is it's not about hamburgers, it's about ownership of land. Because in Peru and in Argentina, if you go out into the forest and you start to use the land, you can claim ownership of the land within 3 to 5 years on the basis of what's called usufruct. You are using the land. So there's an incentive for people to go out and use the land. And using the land doesn't mean like tapping the trees. That's not considered use. Using the land basically means clear cutting and growing something or bringing cattle on. So that's what's driving it. It's getting ownership of that land. Why? Because the land value in the Amazon, for example, appreciates almost 1,000% a year. So what's the best investment in the world? Go clear cut 10 acres in the Amazonian rainforest, put some crops in there, put a few cows on it, and wait a couple of years for someone to come along and buy it off you. And you've made a fortune. And that's the biggest driver of deforestation in Brazil. It's this underlying growth of the value of the land. So again, we want to save habitat. So we tell people, well, don't eat hamburgers, because if you don't eat hamburgers, then they won't cut down forests. But that's not what's driving it. It's the economics of land ownership in Brazil and in parts of Argentina. So again, I told you, this is a wide-ranging talk. We got to get into a lot of different subjects. And then there's climate change. Climate change is becoming absolutely the most horrendous impact on critical migratory bird habitat, and the ability of farmers to survive. So what do we know about climate change? Well, the biggest impacts of climate change in the tropics are radically rising temperatures, are changes in rainfall patterns, in intensity and timing of rainfall patterns. So if the rain doesn't come at the right time, the cherries don't, the plants don't flower. If the plants don't flower, the cherry doesn't develop on the flower. And what's inside that cherry? The coffee seeds. Coffee is the seed inside a cherry that grows on a plant. You can see them in Maria's farm, in Marcela's farm in Nicaragua, which is affected by rust, la roya, which is a major disease of coffee farms, which only comes up every 20 or 30 years, and it's climate induced. So because of the radically changing temperatures in Nicaragua and Colombia and southern Mexico, rust has gone wild. And in places like Colombia, 30% of the coffee crop has disappeared as a result of rust. Now that's a statistic. That doesn't tell you that for Marcela's farm, she lost 90% of her crop, where a farm on the other side of the valley lost nothing. So 30% is like a national average. And you say, 30% is not so bad. Well, it is when you're losing almost your entire crop. And coffee takes 3 to 5 years to come back. So if you plant, for rust, you have to take out the tree and burn it. Once you do that and you plant a new plant, it takes 3 to 5 years for it to produce a bean. So for 3 to 5 years, these coffee farmers have no income, because coffee is the primary and often only source of income for coffee farmers. So what do? They're either going to clear more land to plant more crops, deforestation again, or they're going to abandon the land, and then someone else is going to come in, cut it down, and put cattle on it, because now they can get free land because the farmer abandoned it. So the dynamics of climate change are really impacting the quality of the environment throughout Latin America, obviously throughout the world, but I'm focusing primarily on Latin America. That picture of a desiccated coffee farm I took in Kenya, because Kenya and southern Ethiopia have been suffering the worst drought for the last 10 years. And that's what a lot of low elevation coffee farms look like. They've simply been burned out. Then on the bottom, you see the impact of rust on the coffee leaves themselves. But rust is a fungus that grows in the soil, and it lays dormant in the soil for years until what happens? The soil changes, the plant weakens, and it can no longer resist the rust coming up the roots and into the trees. It's like viruses and colds. We have them in our systems, but as long as we're healthy, they stay quiet. When we get stressed out, when we get tired and weak, boom, the populations blossom and we get sick again. Well, that's what these diseases are in the coffee lands. It's the same thing with poison ivy here. Poison ivy has gotten stronger. It's gotten more concentrated, right? Because the environment around it no longer keeps it in check. And that's what climate change is doing. It's changing the plant's ability to survive within its own ecosystem. Also changing weather events, the incidence of storms, destructive storms leading to landslides, mudslides, destruction of forest areas and plants. It's really bad. This year, they are predicted to be 25 named storms. Usually there's 12. There will be 6 major storms, the meteorologists say. Usually there's 1 or 2. We're in for a very rough tropical hurricanes season, just starting now. All right. That's climate change. Well, besides birds, we have to worry about other migrations, because climate change and deforestation is causing mass migration from coffee farms. So coming up against our southern border, of the 5 countries that provide migrants trying to get into America, the largest is Guatemala. And of the Guatemalans in that photo, the largest amount are coffee farmers from Huehuetenango province, where we work, because conditions are so bad that the money is so low, people can't hold on to their land, and the environment is changing because of climate change, so people can't grow their crops like they used to. And so especially the young people are flocking north, okay? So one of the drivers of migration, you know, instead of being punitive, is all we got to do is pay more for coffee. If we pay more for coffee, then people can earn a living on their land and they won't need to leave. That's what the farmers say all the time. And I've been advocating this for years because we had this exact same situation in the year 2000 when there were more migrants than today rushing up against the southern border. And it was because of this coffee pricing crisis, which is here again, now exacerbated by climate change. So you want to stop migration issues or address migration issues in a decent way, we have to pay more for the coffee. Coffee is also the second most heavily pesticided crop in the world after cotton. All right, and here's a list of the most commonly used pesticides on coffee. Yes, DDT is on the top of the list. DDT, interestingly, is banned for use in the United States, right? Thank you, Rachel Carson. But DDT is not banned for production in the United States, and it's not banned for export. So what do? We manufacture DDT, malathion, Endrin here, and then we ship them to Guatemala, to Brazil, to Mexico to be used on coffee. All right. So as I said, coffee, second most heavily pesticided crop in the world, and the majority of coffee pesticides are banned or the most restricted here in the United States. Something important to know. And that's why organic coffee is so important. It's important for the environment down there. It's also important for who we are here, because a lot of these things are bioaccumulative. So even though they're sprayed as parts per billion in the South on the coffee plants, and when we get here, you know, we roast it at 450 degrees, you pour boiling water on it. It's parts per billion in the cup as well, parts per billion. But what happens over time is it bioaccumulates in body fat, especially women's breast tissue, so that when we're older and we start to draw down our fat reserves, that's why we get the gobble gobble arms, right? Because we're starting to draw down our fat reserves, and it comes out of solution in our bodies in parts per million, which is very different than parts per billion. And there's been a lot of work done that's tying some of these chemicals now to Alzheimer's and advanced diseases of age. So we're taking them in and we're letting them out in much higher concentrations. So besides organics, the second way of dealing with habitat, and the best way, frankly, of all the labels, there's a lot of labels out there. I do a whole talk on all the different labels that are out there. But the best label out there is bird friendly. The best label is bird friendly for a whole host of reasons. For one thing, it's not an industry label. The coffee industry didn't invent it themselves to make themselves look good, like UTSCAPE, Rainforest Alliance, a whole bunch of labels that are used, even direct trade, that aren't really meaningful labels. They're self-created labels that coffee companies created so that they have a label, so that they wouldn't have to get organic certification, or they wouldn't have to pay fair prices to the farmer like fair trade. All those other labels don't require anything. They look good, but they don't require anything of importance like we're talking about. But along comes Smithsonian. So in 1993, Bob Rice from Smithsonian decided to start this Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center. And I met him and said, "You're right on." I was the only environmental lawyer in the coffee world. And I said, "I know what you're talking about. This is important stuff." So we gave the first $1,000 for that first conference in Washington on migratory birds and coffee. And we've been supporting Smithsonian ever since. So it's very interesting. The Smithsonian program has evolved, and it's super scientific. I'm going to explain it to you very, very briefly. But it's basically, you know, it's conservation biology, right? It's how do we create ecosystems or maintain ecosystems that mimic the right ecosystem for these migratory species. And how do we then work with farmers to ensure that there's incentive for farmers to go about and do this? Because as we said, if the price is low, there's no incentive for farmers to do anything. Just sell the damn coffee and try something else. Get some cacao, get some oranges in there. But coffee, nobody can pay the bills on coffee, and they've never been able to, except for the large plantations, because they have access to loans from big banks and generally don't pay their workers much. Okay, so let's talk about the Smithsonian program. Smithsonian requires, at a minimum, that the farms are organic certified. That is really important. Organic certification takes a minimum of 3 years. It's soil testing. The farmers have to learn. It's not just don't use chemicals. Like a lot of people say, oh, our farms are organic. They don't use chemicals down there. I hear that all the time. That's called organic by neglect, not organic by design, okay? So organic by design is a 3-year program that leads to certification where the farmers learn about water conservation, soil conservation, migratory species, the importance of mixed stories, the importance of mixed ecosystems. And, you know, you might think, well, farmers know all that stuff, but not necessarily, you know. Like my grandfather was a farmer out Midwest, and his philosophy with pesticides was, well, I heard him say this, if 1 pound per acre will kill him, 2 pounds of acre will kill him twice as good, you know? And so farmers are people. They work with the information they have. So it's not hierarchical or, you know, we're smarter than they are to say, wow, you know, here's some information about migratory bird habitat that you may not know, but you can integrate into your farm. And if you do, you can get a certification that will lead you to hopefully greater income, as well as obviously taking care of your own environment for your future generations. So in the Smithsonian system, stage 1, they have to be organic certified, which is great because already the farmers are primed for taking care of the environment. And that's why this system is so successful. Next, they have to have a plan, or they have to exhibit structured diversity, structured biodiversity on their farm. What that means is it's a very technical system that foliage must cover at least 40% of the plot. So there's not large bare spots. So you've got to have at least 40% coverage, regardless of slope. The foliage on the farm must reflect 3 layers. A top layer, a canopy layer, where the height is at least 36 feet. That's, you can see that. You have to have at least 36 feet, okay? 36 feet going up to 35 meters. So very, very, that's 90 feet, right, or 100 feet. So the top layer has to be very, very high, and it has to be made up 60% of native species. You can't be throwing eucalyptus and a whole host of other trees in there that don't belong in that ecosystem. You have to use native trees. And that's really great because in all of our replanting programs, our reforestation programs in the 5 countries we're working on that in, it's the farmers who go into the forest and gather the seeds of native trees, who then create the nurseries, who then grow the trees and do the replanting. That's our model, okay? I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So it's 3 layers. Top layer is high canopy native species, backbone species. Second is the taller, what's called emergent natives, the shade trees in the middle, all right? And they have to account for about at least 20% of the trees that are in the mix here. And then the understory, which is small trees, shrubs, coffee plants, and they account for 20%. So 60, 20, 20. That's the makeup of your forest on your farm. That's the basics of the Smithsonian program. So the farmers have to prove that that's what they've got. And if they don't have it, and we send inspectors in, when they do the organic inspection, they also do the bird-friendly inspection. And the guy will go around and count the trees and say, okay, you need, you know, another 10% of shade trees in here. you need another 20% of tall anchor or backbone grandfather species, they call them in indigenous languages, but backbone species. And the farmers will replant and do what they have to do, and then they can get their certification. So that's the only thing, that's the only program, the Smithsonian Bird Friendly program is the only one that's really dedicated to bird habitat, migratory species habitat, and obviously it's organic as well. The Rainforest Alliance program, which sort of mimics the bird friendly program, also has a shade grown requirement, but this year they gutted it, frankly. They changed a lot of these kind of technical requirements so that unless you're a scientist, you really don't understand how this has just gotten, it's sort of like the post office, you know, unless you know what's going on, you didn't see all the machines heading out the back door and the overtime not getting paid. It's the same thing with Rainforest Alliance. It's a seal that is supported by all the large exporters and large companies, and they're basically trying to get a seal. And so they've gutted a lot of the important environmental aspects of what was an okay seal up until a couple of years ago. So Smithsonian is really the thing. However, we're starting to understand through the Smithsonian program and the more and more research that's done, we're understanding, wow, we got a long way to go here. It's not just the trees. What is it? It's what the birds need to survive. So the new frontiers of research now are, what are the specific insect species that particular bird species need to be drawn to and stay in an ecosystem, and what trees then are the most productive for those insect species. This is brand new research and it's just getting started. We're funding it in Peru, we're funding it in Guatemala through Smithsonian, but this is brand new stuff and really, really wonderful for a whole new generation of tropical ecologists. So how are we on time? I don't have a timer here. What do we got?
It's about 8 o'clock, so if we can wrap it up within like 10 minutes, I think, you know, the...
No problem. I wish I had another hour, but I'll take 10 minutes. So what we do, our business model is that we work directly, you know, I'm not a businessman. I'm an indigenous rights lawyer, an environmental lawyer, a community organizer, an international development worker. Business is a vehicle for change for me. So I'm not interested in profit growth. Those things happen. We've grown every year for 28 years. It's a beautiful company, but it's about change. It's about values. So our business model is that we work with cooperatives. We help form cooperatives. We work with them to create programs that address the developmental needs that the farmers themselves identify and that we help them get the resources for. We work together to create programs. But at the end of the day, the farmers manage and own all the programs. We don't bring in Save the Children, Rainforest Alliance, CARE to create hierarchies on top of already oppressed poor people. No, it's about empowering them to run their own show and to teach that shade grown, that bird friendly has meaning not only for the environment, but in the world of economics for them. So that's one of our programs, is helping cooperatives become certified Smithsonian. We're the only coffee company, and I'm quite serious about this, we're the only coffee company that actually does this. Otherwise, it's Smithsonian, which is Bob Rice, who just retired, and 3 other people on his staff running all over the world, trying to get all these farmers interested. And in the 18 years they've been doing it, 20 years they've been doing it, you know, they've only gotten to about 20, 25 farms around the world. And I said, Bob, you're never gonna grow unless you rely on the people who are actually out in the field to be your agents. So I said, let me experiment. Let me deal with Pangoa in Peru. And he said, oh, I'd love to work with Pangoa. I said, well, I've been working with him. We brought him into the fair trade world in 2003. Let me talk to them. So we had community meetings all over the area of Pangoa. And we talked about shade grown, the importance of it, got the farmers to buy in. And within a year, they were certified. And then now they're getting more money. They're already organic, they're already fair trade, and now they're Smithsonian certified. So they're really getting the best money they can for their coffee. And we work directly with them to do that. It's really important. What do? Well, I told you, we've got the biggest reforestation program in the coffee industry ongoing since 2004, 350,000 hardwood trees all over these valleys that were deforested under earlier USAID funded development programs, okay? But you can see what these beautiful forests look like. We also have a global a program to challenge climate change all over the world in the 10 countries we're in, which includes building nurseries, alternative income with alternative crops, composting programs and soil regeneration programs. This is what we do, and it's really important to me. We have a really interesting initiative in Sumatra in Indonesia because Smithsonian doesn't work in Latin America. I'm sorry, Smithsonian only works in Latin America and one farm in Ethiopia, okay? They do not work in Asia. And I said, Bob, there's this whole world of Asia with migratory species. Let me bring you into Indonesia. So we started working in Sumatra a couple of years ago with cooperatives exactly doing this, to do reforestation, to do endangered species management, to do land rights in our Reclaiming Sumatra program. So again, here's your deforested area turned into a palm oil plantation. We're working with organizations to buy failing palm oil plantations and reforest, cut down the palm oil trees. I was supposed to be there in January with my chainsaw, cutting down those palm trees, but COVID, okay? So we're gonna do that soon. We replant, and then we can reintroduce our endangered orangutan. We can reintroduce endangered Sumatran elephant, tiger, bear, oh my. There's all sorts of endangered species that are coming back into the forest as we reestablish forests. You can also see giant snakes. There's giant snakes in Sumatra, reticulated pythons that are lots of fun to hold and take a picture quickly. We sponsored and helped develop the first birding survey ever in Sumatra in the coffee lands. It just was completed a couple months ago. Here are a couple of the species, and a number of endangered species were located in the coffee lands. So that gives us a nice hook with the farmers. And I'm more than happy to send you all a copy of the birding survey in Sumatra. It's a brilliant document. We worked with a university, with birding clubs, with farmers, to put together this consortium to do a first-class birding survey under Smithsonian. So that's the kind of stuff we do, because it's one thing to buy coffee. If you're a coffee guy, you go to a broker and you say, I want to buy some bird-friendly coffee. That's nice and that's important, but the real change is getting out there and working with the farmers to empower them to make better change in their lives. So the question is, how do we work together to save migratory birds worldwide? Well, I'm hoping tonight is the broadside, the first educational broadside to get you thinking about the larger issues in this, because it's not just giving money to, the Songbird Foundation. Great people, but what do? Right? It's about buying the bird-friendly coffee. It's about buying organic coffee. It's about talking to the roasters you buy from and saying, what do you know about the migratory bird habitat in the farms you buy? And then getting real answers from them, not bullshit answers, because everybody in coffee just tells stories about what they do and they don't really do it. So you can really hammer on people and get the truth out of them. But at the end of the day, if you want to support the environment and you want to support migratory birds, and by the way, coffee farmers, you just got to know where you're buying from and make sure that you're putting your money where your beak is. Okay? So thanks for having me. This has been great fun. If we got time for a few questions, I'm more than happy to oblige. I don't want to keep you from the convention. Like I said, I could have talked for hours. Thanks for having me.
Dean, that was unbelievable.
Thank you.
It was a lot of jam-packed information. So thank you so much, and we'll have to do it again. But I'm going to go through a few of these chat questions. First one was from Donnie. Do you collaborate with the American Bird Conservancy? Promoting shade-grown coffee has been a major part of their mission in the neotropics.
No, there are a lot of organizations, but I don't work with them. No, we work directly with farmers and we work with Smithsonian.
Okay.
So thank you, though.
Charlotte asked, based on something you said about Baltimore Orioles, She said, do they nest twice a year? She thought they nested in North America in winter.
Yes, yes, they do. Absolutely.
Oh.
Yes.
Didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, pretty interesting. Well, think about it, right? It's summer all year long for migratory species. Yeah.
Tom asked, what habitat did the ovenbird and wood thrush use in a shade-grown coffee plantation? He's visited several and never seen or heard ground-dwelling birds.
Well, shade-grown plantations, remember, still can have theoretically up to 40% open. So there's plenty of places, if we look at that film again, you'll see there are plenty of places that have small openings and therefore margins for thrush and ground cover for ovenbirds. So they don't need, they don't only need wide open fields. There's plenty of fields. There's plenty of small fields within a beautiful shade-grown farm.
Okay. Underpinning the speculators is still the basic rule of supply and demand, the ultimate determinant of price, was a comment from Donnie in terms of.
That's correct. That's correct. That's why fair trade, for example, is an effort to get away from the commodity price and try, we have contracts with farm cooperatives in 10 countries, and every one of them, we negotiate directly with them. They push on us, we push on them. They ask for more and we say, we can give you more, but we can't give you that much more because we got to make a living too. That's that's free trade, isn't it? That's the definition of free trade. But that's what fair trade is about. If you buy blind on commodity markets and small companies and big companies do, you can divorce yourself and you can say, well, it's supply and demand, I'm not responsible. But that's really an excuse because we know these days who's growing our coffee, what the conditions are, and we can accept, do I want to make a living or do I want to make a killing? That's our choice. You don't have to blame supply and demand. We're beyond that if you choose to, but the majority of the industry is still stuck in the commodity mindset.
Right. Okay, Diane said, when I visited Brazil, the lodge owner was trying to restore his property to native trees and plants. He said eucalyptus trees are almost impossible to kill and remove. The wood is very hard, difficult to cut down, and the tree grows back from the roots, really a big problem.
Very true. Eucalyptus trees are also tremendous water suckers. So they create a real problem of sucking up underground water from surrounding plants. But those eucalyptus trees probably came in there under a government-sponsored development program. That was a very big thing in the 80s. And yeah, they got to be cut down. You can control them. Plenty of people have small eucalyptus patches, but they don't belong anywhere near a shade-grown farm.
Okay. The other comments were thank yous. I want to tell everyone who's still on the call, which is most of us, that we did record it in case you want to go back for something you missed.
Good.
And so if you want to see it again, we'll have it for a short time, couple of days. You can email Sunny or me.
No, let me be clear. I'll post, I don't want to get 20 emails. I'll post the link on the event page itself. So, and I won't get that until later tonight or tomorrow.
Yeah,
and
there are a bunch of people who couldn't join us tonight who want to see it. So.
The event page on our website on the calendar. So look for this event you'll have to diddle with the calendar, but you'll be able to find it there. If you can't find it, then email me. Look there.
May I make an offer?
Sure.
I don't mind. See, I don't mind getting emails. I love it. I spend half my week responding to people's emails. So if anybody has a specific question they want to ask me or turn me on to another organization they think is doing good work, like the gentleman did, email me. I'm happy to, I will respond. My email is simple. It's dean@deansbeans.com. Okay. Feel free to write me and I'll be happy to give you my best shot.
Dean, thank you, and amazing work you're doing, and I think we're all jealous.
Oh yeah, did I mention that I have the best time ever doing this? If I was just selling coffee for a living, I wouldn't be doing this, but it's adventure, it's meaningful, it's different, it's different cultures. I got tattoos all over my body that I get in the different countries. Oh my God, what a life. I'm a happy guy.
You're blessed, and we're blessed to have you. So,
All right, I'm gonna unmute everybody so that people can. Let's give Dina a little round of applause.
Oh,
Yay. Thank you
Thank you
very
again.
thanks, everybody.
it was wonderful, and Nina, I'll be in touch with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure to talk to you tonight.
All right, everybody, pick up around your chairs. Clean up after yourself.
Bye.
Good night.
Night. Thanks,
everyone.
Dean.
Thank
Bet,
you.
Sonny. Thanks, Rena.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, ending the meeting. Bye.